Section 41 of John Inglesant, A Romance. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. John Inglesant, A Romance, by Joseph Henry Shorthouse. Chapter 26, Part 1. Some few days after the conversation at the Cardinal's villa, Inglesant received his first commission as an agent of the Society of the Jesuits. He was invited to sup with the superior of the English Jesuits, Father at the college called St. Tommaso degli Inglesi. After the meal, over which nothing was spared to render it delicious, and during the course of which the superior exerted himself to please, the latter said, "I am instructed to offer you a commission which, if I mistake not, will both prove very interesting to you and will also be of advantage to your interests. You are probably acquainted with the story of the old Duke of Umbria. You have heard that, wearied with age and tired of the world, he resigned the dukedom to his son, his only child, the object of all his hopes and the fruit of careful training and instruction. This son, far from realizing the brilliant hopes of his father, indulged in every kind of riot and debauchery, and finally died young, worn out before his time. The old Duke, broken-hearted by this blow, has virtually made over the succession to the Holy Father, and lives now alone and silent in his magnificent palace, caring for no worldly thing and devoting all his thoughts to religion and to his approaching end. He is unhappy in the prospect of his dissolution, and the only persons who are admitted to his presence are those who promise him any comfort in the anticipation or any clearness in the vision of the future life. Quacks and impostors of every kind, priests and monks and fanatics, are admitted freely and trouble this miserable old man and drive him into intolerable despair. To give to this old man, whose life of probity, of honour, of devotion to his people, of conscientious rectitude is thus miserably rewarded, to give some comfort to this miserable victim of a jealousy which the superstitious miscall that of heaven, is a mission which the ethereal chivalry of the soul will eagerly embrace. It is one, I may say without flattery, for which I hold you singularly fitted. A passionate religious fervour such as yours, combined in the most singular manner with the freest speculative opinions, and commended by a courteous grace, will at once soothe and strengthen this old man's shattered intellect, distracted and tormented, and rapidly sinking into imbecility and dotage." Father paused and filled his glass. Then, passing the wine to Inglesant, he continued half carelessly, "I said that the Duke had virtually made over the succession of his state to the Papal See, but this has not been formally ratified, and there has arisen some hesitation and difficulty respecting it. Some of the unsuitable advisers, to whom the Duke in his mental weakness has unfortunately lent an ear, have endeavoured to persuade him that the interests of his people will be imperilled by their country being placed under the mild and beneficent rule of the Holy Father. We hear something of a Lutheran who, by some unexplained means, has obtained considerable influence with this unhappy old man, and we are informed that there is great danger of the Duke's hesitating so long before he completes the act of succession that his death may occur before it is complete. You will, of course, exert the influence which I hope and expect that you will soon gain at the ducal court to hasten this consummation so desirable for the interests of the people, of the papacy, and of the Duke himself. Inglesant had listened to this communication with great interest. The prospect which the earlier part of it had opened before him was in many respects an attractive one, and the flattering words of the superior were uttered in a tone of sincerity which made them very pleasant to hear. The description of the Duke's condition offered to him opportunities of mental study of absorbing interest, and the characters of those by whom he was surrounded would no doubt present combinations and varieties of singular and unusual curiosity. It must not be denied, moreover, that there entered into his estimate of the proposal made to him somewhat of the prospect of luxurious and courtly life, of that soft clothing, both of body and spirit, which they who live in kings' houses wear. It is difficult, indeed, for one who has been long accustomed to refined and dainty living, where every sense is trained and strengthened by the fruition it enjoys, to regard the future altogether with indifference in respect to these things. The palace of the Duke was notorious throughout all Italy for the treasures of art which it contained, though its master in his old age was become indifferent to such delights. But though these thoughts passed through his mind as the superior was speaking, Inglesant was too well versed in the ways of courts and ecclesiastics not to know that there was something more to come, and to attend carefully for its development. The latter part of the superior's speech produced something even of a pleasurable amusement, as the skilfully executed tactics of an opponent are pleasing to a good player either at cards or chess. The part which he was now expected to play, the side which he was about to espouse, taken in connection with the difficulties and impressions which had perplexed him since he had arrived in Italy, and which had not been removed by what he had seen in Rome itself, corresponded so exactly with the scheme which, to his excited imagination, was being spiritually developed for his destruction, a morbid idea possibly which the lofty beneficence of Molinos's doctrine had only partially removed, but its appearance and recognition actually provoked a smile. But the smile which the superior noticed and entirely misunderstood was succeeded by uneasiness and depression. There was, however, little hesitation and no apparent delay in Inglesant's manner of acceptance. The old habit of implicit obedience was far from obliterated or even weakened, and though Father St. Clair was not present, the supreme motive of his influence was not unfelt. He had chosen his part when in Paris he had turned his back upon De Crécy and accepted the Jesuits' offer of the mission to Rome. He had lived in Rome, had been received and countenanced and entertained as one who had accepted the service of those who had so courteously and hospitably treated him, and it was far too late now, when the first return was expected of him, to draw back or to refuse. To obey was not only a recognized duty, it was an instinct which not only long training but experience even served to strengthen. He assured the superior that he was perfectly ready to set out. He assured himself, indeed, that it was not necessary to come to a decision at that moment, and that he should be much better able to decide upon his course of conduct when he had seen the Duke himself and received more full instructions from Rome. The superior informed Inglesant that he would be expected to visit Umbria as a gentleman of station, and offered to provide the necessary means. Inglesant contented himself with declining this offer for the present. Since his arrival at Rome he had received considerable sums of money from England, the result of Lady Cardiff's bounty, and the Cardinal's purse was open to him in several indirect ways. He provided himself with the necessary number of servants, horses, and other conveniences, and some time, as would appear, after Easter he arrived at Umbria. On his journey, as he rode along in the wonderful clear morning light, in his osteria in the middle of the day, and when he resumed his journey in the cool of the evening, his thoughts had been very busy. He remembered his conversation with the Count Vesperiani, and was unable to reconcile his present mission with the pledge he had given to the Count. He was more than once inclined to turn back and refuse to undertake the duty demanded of him. Thoughts of Loretta and of the strange fate that had separated him from her also occupied his mind, and with these conflicting emotions still unreconciled, he saw at last the white facade of the palace towering above the orange groves and the houses and pinnacles of the city. The ducal palace at Umbria is a magnificent example of the Renaissance style. It is impossible to dwell in or near this wonderful house without the life becoming affected and even diverted from its previous course by its imperious influence. The cold and mysterious power of the classic architecture is wedded to the rich and libertine fancy of the Renaissance, treading unrestrained and unabashed the maze of nature and of fantasy, and covering the classic purity of outline with its exquisite tracery of fairy life. Over door and window and pilaster throng and cling the arabesque carvings of foliage and fruit, of graceful figures and fantastic forms and positions, all of infinite variety, all full of originality, of life, of motion, and of character, all of exquisite beauty, both of design and workmanship. The effect of the whole is lightness and joy, while the eye is charmed and the sense filled with a luxurious satisfaction at the abounding wealth of beauty and lavish imagination. But together with this delight to eye and sense there is present to the mind a feeling not altogether painless, of oppressive luxury, and of the mating of incongruous forms, arousing, as it were, an uneasy conscience, and affecting the soul somewhat as the overpowering perfume of tropical vegetation affects the senses. To dwell in this palace was to breathe an enchanted air, and as the wandering prince of story loses his valour and strength in the magic castle into which he strays, so here the indweller, whose intellect was mastered by the genius of the architecture, found his simplicity impaired, his taste becoming more sensuous and less severely chaste, and his senses lulled and charmed by the insidious and enervating spirit that pervaded the place. At his first presentation, Inglesant found the Duke seated in a small room fitted as an oratory or closet, and opening by a private door into the ducal pew in the chapel. His person was bowed and withered by age and grief, but his eye was clear and piercing, and his intellect apparently unimpaired. He regarded his visitor with an intense and scrutinizing gaze, which lasted for several minutes, and seemed to indicate some suspicion. There was, however, about Inglesant's appearance and manner something so winning and attractive that the old man's eyes gradually softened, and the expression of distrust that made his look almost that of a wild and hunted creature changed to one of comparative satisfaction and repose. It is true that he regarded with pleasure and hope every newcomer from whom he expected to derive consolation and advice. Inglesant expected that he would inquire of the news of Rome, of the Pope's health, and such like matters, but he seemed to have no curiosity concerning such things. After waiting for some time in silence, he said, "Anthony Guevara tells us that we ought to address men who are under 30 with 'You are welcome,' or 'You come in a good hour,' because at that time of life they seem to be coming into the world. From 30 to 50 we ought to greet them with 'God keep you,' or 'Stand in a good hour,' and from 50 onwards with 'God speed you,' or 'Go in a good hour,' for from thence they go taking their leave of the world. The first is easy to say, and the wish not unlikely to be fulfilled, but the last who shall ensure? You come in a good hour, graceful as an Apollo, to comfort a miserable old man. Can you assure me that when I pass out of this world I shall depart likewise at a propitious time? I am an old man, and that unseen world which should be so familiar and near to me seems so far off, and yet so terrible. A young man steps into life as into a dance, confident of his welcome, pleased himself and pleasing others. The stage to which he comes is bright with flowers, soft music sounds on every side. So ought the old man to enter into the new life, confident of his welcome, pleasing to his Maker and his God, the heavenly minstrelsy in his ears. But it is far otherwise with me. I may lay me down in the angelica vestis, the monkish garment that ensures the prayers of holy men for the departing soul, but who will secure me the wedding garment that ensures admission to the banquet above? "Do you find no comfort in the blessed sacrament, Altezza?" said Inglesant. "Sometimes I may fancy so, but I cannot see the figure of the Christ for the hell that lies between." "Ah, Altezza," said Inglesant, his eyes full of pity, not only for the old Duke, but for himself and all mankind, "it is always thus. Something stands between us and the heavenly life. My temptation is other than yours. Communion after communion, I find Christ, and he is gracious to me, gracious as the love of God himself. But month after month, and year after year, I find not how to follow him. And when the road is open to me, I am deaf, and refuse to answer to the heavenly call. You, Altezza, are in more hopeful case than I, for it seems to me that your Highness has but to throw off that blasphemous superstition which is found in all Christian creeds alike, which has not feared to blacken even the shining gates of heaven with the smoke of hell." "All creeds are alike," said the Duke with a shudder, "but mostly your northern religions, harsh and bitter as your skies. I've heard from a Lutheran a system of religion that made my blood run cold, the more as it commends itself to my calmer reason." "And that is, Altezza?" said Inglesant. "This, that so far from the sacrament of absolution upon earth, or at the hour of death, availing anything, God himself has no power to change the state of those who die without being entirely purified from every trace of earthly and sensual passion. To such as these, though otherwise sincere Christians, nothing awaits but a long course of suffering in the desolate regions of Hades, as the Lutheran calls it, until, if so may be, the earthly idea is annihilated and totally obliterated from the heart." "This seems little different from the doctrine of the Church," said Inglesant. "It is different in this most important part," replied the Duke, "that Holy Church purifies and pardons her penitent, though he feels the passions of earth strong within him till the last. But by this system you must eradicate these yourself. You must purify your heart. You must feel every carnal lust, every vindictive thought, every lofty and contemptuous notion utterly dead within you before you can enjoy a moment's expectation of future peace. He that goes out of this world with an uncharitable thought against his neighbour does so with the chances against him that he is lost forever, for his face is turned from the light, and he enters at once upon the devious and downward walks of the future life. And what ground has he to expect that he who could not keep his steps in this life will find any to turn him back, or will have power to turn himself back from every growing evil in the world to come?" As the Duke spoke, it seemed to Inglesant that these words were addressed to him alone, and that he saw before him the snare of the devil, baited with the murderer of his brother, stretched before his heedless feet for his eternal destruction. The Duke took up a book that lay by him and read. The soul that cherishes the slightest animosity and takes this feeling into eternity cannot be happy, though in other respects pious and faithful. Bitterness is completely opposed to the nature and constitution of heaven. The blood of Christ, who on the cross, in the midst of the most excruciating torments, exercised love instead of bitterness, cleanses from this sin also when it flows in our veins. "I see nothing in this, Altezza," said Inglesant eagerly, "but what is in accordance with the doctrines of the Church. This is that idea of sacramental purification, that Christ's body, being assimilated to ours, purifies and sanctifies. His body being exalted at that supreme moment and effort, the moment of his suffering death, to the highest purity of temper and of sweetness by the perfect love and holiness which pervaded his spirit, has been able ever since in all ages through the mystery of the Blessed Sacrament to convert all its worthy recipients in some degree to the same pure and holy state. Many things which men consider misfortunes and painful experiences are, in fact, but the force of this divine influence assimilating their hearts to his, and attempering their bodies to the lofty purity of his own. This is the masterwork of the devil, that he should lure us into states of mind, as the book says, of bitterness and of violence, by which this divine sweetness is tainted, and this peace broken by suspicion, and by hatred and heat of blood. The book says somewhere, said the Duke, turning over the leaves, that as the penitent thief rose from the cross to paradise, so we, if we long after Christ, with all the powers of our souls, shall, at the hour of death, rapidly soar aloft from our mortal remains, and then all fear of returning to earth and earthly desires will be at an end. It must surely, said Inglesant, after a pause, speaking more to himself than to the Duke, be among the things most surprising to an angelic nature that observes mankind, that shadows ourselves, standing upon the confines even of this shadowy land, and not knowing what, if aught awaits us elsewhere, hatred or revenge or unkindness, should be among the last passions that are overcome. When the veil is lifted and we see things as they really are, nothing will so much amaze us as the blindness and perversity that marked our life among our fellow men. Surely the lofty life is hard, as it seems hard to your grace, but the very effort itself is gain. End of section 41.